This is a picture of me and my wife, Charisse. And anytime I get to talk about my wife, I do, because I definitely married up. We just got married in 2020, and one of the foundational things that we talked about before marriage was our careers, how important they are to us. We talked about what we wanted to be when we grew up, what our paths were, and how we ended up where we are today. Charisse is the SVP of Marketing and Comms at HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign. She worked 3 jobs when she went to college. She got a degree in communications and an internship that helped launch her career into the entertainment industry, entrepreneurship, and most recently, nonprofits. And even though we are both in our, of mature ages, she is still paying off those student loans. Now, I had a very different path. I am also SVP, but of ESG, and I have been working since I was 14 years old. My first job was at a Black-owned flower shop. I worked retail throughout high school, sometimes having 2 jobs when I wasn't playing sports. I do not have a degree. I didn't have any internships, and my career started during the first dot-com bubble and burst. I landed jobs in operations, in startups that don't exist anymore. But when that bubble burst, I got laid off for the first time in my life. And for the first time in my life, I was out of work, with the exception of when I had my son for a few months. But I couldn't find work, and even though I had skills and experience, I was turned down because I didn't have a college degree. I was out of work for 6 months. I had to move back in with my parents. I couldn't sustain myself and my son, and I was ashamed. I finally got a job that a friend helped me get, and I went from making $90,000 a year to $11.75 an hour. That's why this work is so important to me. I understand what it's like to have barriers to employment. I understand what it's like to be evaluated on credentials or lack thereof versus skill. I understand how it feels for the world of work to have left me behind. So, what's happening in the world of work? It can be bewildering. It can be a bewildering time to be in the job market or search for talent to support your business. In April of 2022, 4.4 million people in the US quit their jobs. And reliable reports tell us that 1 in 5 workers plan to resign by the end of this year. Plus, the world is volatile for entrepreneurs and their startups right now, with reports of over 80,000 layoffs in 2022 alone and climbing from tech companies big and small. Not to mention, talks of a recession have rattled both employers and employees alike. And yet, employer demand for workers remains strong, with job postings on Indeed rising above their pre-pandemic baseline in August. But just because jobs are available and the demand for talent is high does not mean it's easy to match the right person to the right role. Half of workers in the US do not earn a living wage. 40% would be in poverty if they were without work for 3 months. And almost half feel like they are underemployed. That friction in the market, that imperfection, is the bad news, or at least the challenge. All of this to say, the world of work, especially from the perspective of the worker and the job seeker, is fundamentally broken. Recruiting strategies that once upon a time were good enough are now looking threadbare and used up. This is the moment to rebuild work for everyone. The key to all of it, to being the change we want to see and to be, is to get outside the box. In the volatile labor market we are facing today, new approaches to recruiting are not only a responsibility, they are a necessity. And not just to attract the candidates you want to attract. Even consumers are leading us there. People are gravitating more than ever to brands and companies that don't just support, but create actionable change. The future of work is better work for all. But how? How do we make the future of work better for both job seekers and businesses that want to recruit them? We build the future of work by seeking and welcoming underappreciated, untapped talent, which includes job seekers facing historical barriers to employment. And the companies that do remove barriers, that do get outside the box, those are the companies that are going to thrive. They'll get the best collective mix and build the best connection to their people. Together, we can break down bias and barriers to entry in the workplace and pave the way for a more equitable world of work. Let's start rebuilding the future of work by tapping into untapped talent. While there are many barriers job seekers face today, we'll be focusing on a few. Let's look at how much of the talent pool we disregard when we don't or won't consider justice-impacted candidates. The unemployment rate among formerly incarcerated individuals is many times more than any unemployment rate we've experienced, even at the depths of the pandemic job market. 77 million people in the US have some type of criminal record. And it's persistent. Over 60% of this population suffers from long-term unemployment, which means they remain unemployed for over a year after release from prison. Even having a misdemeanor or an arrest without a conviction can create a host of lifelong barriers that stand in the way of employment. Mass incarceration disproportionately impacts communities of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and those with a history of mental health issues. The school-to-prison pipeline disproportionately impacts communities of color in the US. And imagine this, someone's criminal history can start as early as high school. School requirements for jobs also pose an obstacle for so many. 2/3 of the US labor market does not have a post-secondary or college degree. And in that demographic, the unemployment rate is up to 2.5 times higher than among those who have a bachelor's degree or higher educational accomplishments. Even in a low unemployment economy, when the need to find talent is at a near record high and the traditional so-called ideal candidate is scarce and at a premium, over half of US employers still overlook candidates with the right skills and proven experience simply for the lack of a post-secondary degree. Finally, let's talk about the talent we overlook when it comes to accessibility. The Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law 32 years ago, but job seekers with disabilities are still facing barriers to employment. 1 in 4 of us in the US live with some sort of other ability. Across all age groups and educational attainment groups, persons with disabilities were much less likely to be employed than those with no disabilities. Of that population, only 19% were employed in 2019. Leaving talent on the sidelines leaves us short of the brain power and capability that could advance our businesses. And on a collective level, it hurts whole economies. The World Economic Forum estimates that the cost of excluding people with disabilities represents up to 7% of GDP in some countries. The future of work starts with us. To get us started, here are 3 ways we can break down bias and barriers to employment. Fair Chance Hiring is built on a mission for every job seeker to have the right to be considered for any role for which they are qualified. That's just common sense, right? But the current state shows us that, unfortunately, employers are not giving all applicants equal opportunity. Everyone here today can make a substantial impact by giving all applicants equal employment access. Now, here's what it looks like when we commit to being the change we want to see in the world. We get performance. People with criminal records are statistically no more likely to be fired for misconduct than workers with no record. We get stability. Countless studies have shown that workers with criminal records have higher retention rates and are less likely to quit. Employers save on turnover and hiring costs. We get to contribute. Not surprisingly, research shows that employment is the antidote to recidivism. A salary, some place to be, a chance to make a difference, the satisfaction of being part of a team, that is how to return pride and self-esteem to an individual, to the benefit of our organizations and society. The share of job searches using terms like no background check and fair chance hiring have risen 45% since May of last year. There is a huge demand for employment from this talent pool. People are looking for a way out of discrimination. They're looking for belonging and respect and a fair chance. Think of all of the candidates who will not see your job postings if you don't include these terms. The good news is we're already seeing companies benefit from expanding their thinking. With today's tight labor market, we've seen job postings on Indeed note fair chance employment policies far more frequently, growing over 30% from 2019 to today. And just this summer, the White House committed over $40 billion to expand the US workforce, including supporting job seekers who face barriers to employment. Let me introduce you to Brittany Hart. Brittany was arrested for a driving infraction a few years ago. She was sentenced to 6 years plus a 4-year parole. She thought she ruined her life. But when Brittany made parole, the first thing she did was call Goodwill, who helped set her on a path towards job readiness through resume building and interview coaching. Then, Brittany logged on to Indeed. By using Fair Chance Filter, she was able to apply for jobs that interested and excited her. Now Brittany works at UPS. And because of this job, Brittany now has access to the life she always wanted to create for herself. Because of this job, Brittany has freedom. We've seen how fair chance hiring can change lives. Now, let's talk about skills-based hiring. We can welcome the right skills by focusing on competency and proven performance, not just degrees or letters. Picture this. Doesn't a friendly bartender or barista with a welcoming personality and entrepreneurial spirit have 80% of the skills needed for a corporate sales role? Shifting towards skills-based hiring, a competency-based approach to hiring could open up opportunities for the roughly 65% of the US adult population that does not have a bachelor's degree and help more businesses thrive. When we can welcome the right skills by focusing on competency and proven performance, why would we starve our organization of that talent? And when you do, you'll be opening up opportunities to a much wider slice of the population, and you'll be bringing in eager, quality, trainable talent to fuel your business's growth, with an interesting set of skills and experiences to bring to the table. But how many of your screening systems would flag that job seeker as a top candidate for you? We can fix that. You can fix that. As disability activist Keely Cat Wells recently said at an Indeed-hosted lunch and learn, disability is part of the human experience. Many of us in this room will experience a temporary or longer-term disability at some point in our life, and most of us know or care for someone living with a disability. By expanding accessibility, we are opening up a rich source of talent that most businesses are overlooking. If a person's other ability affects their mobility or requires accommodation of physical spaces, the pandemic has made us fully rethink people's ability to work from home while being a fully participating team member. Technological progress has allowed new doors to open for people with sight and hearing challenges. It has become much easier for application designers and web developers to deliver products that are fully conscious of screen readers and allow alt text. The legal system, from the Americans with Disabilities Act and similar legislation worldwide to more recent judicial rulings, have made software providers and web publishers more aware of their obligation to use these tools. Let's make the labor market more accessible, one job at a time. And by rethinking our approach, we can cast a wider net of recruitment and expand our talent pool. Everyone in this room today has a unique opportunity to set a clear benchmark for a world which work is equitable, for a world in which job seekers facing barriers can find better work, for a world in which everyone has equal opportunity to find jobs they love. This is a world I want to live in. And I think you're here today because you share that desire. At Indeed, we believe in drinking our own champagne or sparkling water or apple juice or whatever it is that you're into. This is why we're committed to helping 30 million people globally who face employment barriers find jobs they love by the year 2030. But we can't do it alone. Together, we can break down bias and barriers to entry into the workplace and pave the way for a more equitable world of work. If you're interested in equitable hiring or ready to recruit and retain all job seekers, we're here to help. Together, we can ensure no job seeker is left behind. Thank you.
So everyone is now zenned out, nearing cocktail hour. I will attempt to keep everyone awake. Thank you. I mean, seeing the content and the discussions today has been so inspiring. And I get to speak with a group of women here today about a topic of great personal passion for me, and I'm sure great importance to many of you here today. Women in the workforce. How do we keep women in, get more in, help them manage life and work and family? And it is so critical to the effectiveness of companies and organizations and also to macro economies around the world. And so I know many of you experienced the upset of COVID in many ways, and you probably know that COVID was particularly devastating to women and women in work. And millions of women around the world had to drop out of work to take care of sick family members, run homeschooling, I call women the fallback players of their families. Of course, many husbands, men, fathers also contribute heavily, but a lot of the family care burden still falls to women, and managing work and family and COVID at the same time proved insurmountable for a lot of people around the world. And there's been a lot of research done about how to quantify that impact. One key study by Oxfam found that women lost $800 billion worth of income and work experience and the economic value of that experience. McKinsey has done a study, and they say that the drop of women from the labor force will cause over $1 trillion in global GDP loss. So these are massive issues for humans, families, and society, governments, and companies, and I'm sure many of you are dealing with that. And the journey is not only about lost income, it's about lost future opportunity and lost equality. And it's sad and awful to say that in many ways we've moved back on the state of women in the workplace, which is hard to imagine. So after all of that great news, and really depressing everyone, there are also areas of good progress. Women also still, as you likely know, make 82 cents to every dollar that a man makes. And that pay gap has been persistent and very challenging. But there are areas we're making progress. And a lot of companies are instituting progressive policies to help women thrive at work. A great example of that is Starbucks. They set a very aggressive goal for themselves to achieve full pay equity for across gender lines, and they achieved that goal in 2018. I would love to see more companies set that goal for themselves. Patagonia, you're probably familiar with, one of the most socially progressive companies in the world. They have had on-site childcare at Patagonia since 1983, and they have valued that 22% of the cost of that childcare is covered through retained employees and higher employee engagement. Another great example is Intel. They set a very audacious vision to radically increase the number of women and people of color at Intel. And through changing their interview practices, they achieved a 40% increase in those groups being represented in their hiring. They require 2 interviewers in every interview slate to be a woman or a person of color. And I know many of you are grappling with how to make diversity and inclusion a key part of your recruiting, and it can yield incredible results. And we have also seen the explosion of remote and hybrid work. I say one of the few silver linings, there's 2 silver linings. Children learn to wash their hands regularly. And secondly, we saw people being able to work more from home. We have seen over a 300% increase in jobs listing remote work options. It's still a small part of the pie. It depends on the country. It's less than 10%. In the U.S., but that expansion of remote and hybrid work opportunities has been really magnificent, and we hope very much to see that continue because it is particularly helpful to people who have families and to women who are juggling many things outside of work. And then another sort of sad example with some good outcomes, as many of you are aware, Roe versus Wade was overturned in the United States, and that means women's access to safe reproductive and abortion care has been greatly reduced. Indeed is proud to provide abortion care coverage for all employees, and we also pay for travel expenses for people who need to go to other states to seek services. And many companies have taken the same stance, DoorDash, Starbucks, Citibank. And it's unfortunate that we have to take these measures, but we're proud to do so because access to safe health care is a non-negotiable for women. Thank you. So miles to go before we sleep to get women to a place of full equality and vibrance in the workforce. But I am joined by three phenomenal leaders today who are going to share insights from their work and their lives. First of all, we have Reshma Saujani, who is the founder of Girls Who Code and also the Marshall Plan for Women. She's an author, an activist, an amazing leader in the world. Lena Waithe, many of you are familiar with her, Emmy award-winning writer, producer, actor, also partners with us on the Rising Voices film production program for BIPOC creative producers. And Dr. Jen Welter, the first female NFL coach, former professional football player, and incidentally in her spare time, a PhD in psychology. So please help me welcome them to the stage. Great, thank you. What a treat and an honor. Thank you so much. And you're such amazing female leaders in your own rights, but you're from such different industries and backgrounds. So I think we'll get a lot of wonderful insights from you. So as we like to say at Indeed, talent is universal, opportunity is not. What are each of you doing in your work and your organizations to open more doors for women? We'll start with Dr. Welter.
One of the things I want to say on that is I never imagined that coaching football was a possibility because there was no one who looked like me doing it. So in fact, I turned my first coaching opportunity down because I said, girls don't do that. Thankfully, the man who hired me was so stubborn, he took the job on my behalf and told me about it. And that taught me how important it is to see someone who looks like you doing what you dream of doing, because it becomes possible and then it becomes more probable because you'll do the work. So for me, I wanted to ensure that as the first, I was not the last. And so that means being visible, it means being vocal, and it means sticking your foot in a door and making sure other people get there. So I've done that with some of the women, making sure they were in the conversations, and also in everything that I build. That means I get to determine who's doing it with me. So if it's Gridiron Girls, which is my nonprofit where we teach confidence through football, and that there is no game you cannot play and no field you do not belong in or on, the commitment from the beginning was that we would have the best male and female coaches, because we could use that community activation and commitment to equity and inclusion in the sport to also build relationships between the women and men in the game. Because when you get on the same grass, you learn that talent is talent. And so in everything that I build, I make sure I'm building with other people who may not have fit the traditional mold. That's my promise, and every girl gets to see it. And I'm gonna be there as much as I can in person, because it changes the game for you when you get to work with somebody that you thought maybe was in the distance, and then you realize that she's just like you.
Wonderful, thanks. Lena? That's great.
I think a big thing what we try to do over at Hillman Grad Productions and also in terms of partnership with Indeed, with our program Rising Voices, is just to make sure that women don't feel as if they're being ostracized in any way. I've never felt that because I'm a woman, there's things I couldn't do or that I'd be treated differently. And I think, ultimately, I want to be as specific as possible with these women who come into the mentorship program, to not just say, okay, you're a woman, so okay, it's just more about what do you want to do? What is your dream? What is the goal, and what is the vision? And I think it's really about finding whatever that is and helping that person to bring that to life. So ultimately for me, it's really about asking them questions so that way I understand how we can be helpful to them. That's really the biggest thing. It's just because you can have 5 women on this stage, and we all going to have very different ideas of what we need and what we want and what's necessary to our success. So I think the biggest thing is just like there's no group that is a monolith, and I think that's something that we just kind of have to remember.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Reshma?
Yeah, I mean, for both the organizations that I'm working on, Girls Who Code and the Marshall Plan for Moms, I think it's all about creating opportunity for those that have been left behind. You know, I'm the daughter of refugees. I've had a job since I was 12 years old. I was running for office. I was the first Indian American woman to run for office in 2010 because I thought it was a great idea. And as part of that, I'd go into all these computer science classrooms in New York City, and there'd just be lines and lines and lines of boys, like not a girl in sight, not a girl of color in sight. And so when I lost my race, I kept thinking about like my father's voice. My father used to always say to me, Reshma, be a doctor or lawyer or an engineer, because that's how you march up into the middle class. And so I knew that those computer science jobs, they paid really well, $120,000, you know, as a software programmer. And so I knew that if girls of color, immigrant girls, daughters of refugees like me could get an opportunity to get one of those jobs, their entire family could march up into the middle class. And so when I started Girls Who Code, you know, over 10 years ago, less than 18% of those in the technology workforce were female. Less than 1%, less than 2% were Black or Latina. And now, 10 years later, we've taught over 500,000 girls to code. We've reached about 500 million through our work. And if you go to any computer science classroom in the country, it's now 40%, 50%, like those are our girls. You know, I have students that are leaving, you know, homeless shelters in the morning and sitting next to a girl who, you know, father's a venture capitalist. And both of them are so far back in terms of their computer science education that they equally have a chance to have access to the American dream. Like, we don't do that anymore. And so that's what we're doing at Girls Who Code. And I started my next organization, the Marshall Plan for Moms, you know, during the pandemic. And I was, you know, found myself with a newborn baby, homeschooling a 6-year-old, running an organization that was about to potentially be shut down. And I saw that moms were getting crushed. And you saw 11 million women get pushed out of the workforce. The majority of those are women of color, because we live in a country that doesn't have paid leave, the only industrialized nation that doesn't have paid leave. 90% of women go back to work 10 days after having a baby. We are the only industrialized nation that doesn't have affordable childcare. Most women work to work. And we are the only industrialized nation that penalizes mothers for being mothers. I mean, you make 58 cents on every dollar if you are a mom in America. And so many moms saw their dreams, their goals crushed. You know, women who were working as Uber drivers, but then were trying to get their nursing degree on the side, but had to give that up because they had to make sure that their kids had food on the table. And so, you know, I launched the Marshall Plan for Moms to like finish the fight for gender equality and to make sure that we are supporting moms, respecting them, treating them with dignity, and giving them an opportunity to finally make workplaces work for women.
Wonderful. Amazing. So I mentioned earlier that women make 82 cents to every man's dollar, and that has been the case for a very, very long time. We are not making enough progress. Do you see progress in your industries, and what encouragement or advice can you give to all of us of how to move the needle there? Start with Lena.
With me? I mean, I think also in the Hollywood industry, it's ever changing. And I think that our industry is sometimes it may seem superficial, but we really are a mirror to society. Looking at the movie Gone with the Wind to me is just as important as watching the news. It's telling a story of our country, even though it may not always be beautiful all the time. But I ultimately think that in the business, I can be an example of someone who's doing well, but I think what ultimately needs to happen is I also have to be a bridge. That's how I think of myself. Like even for example, like in the category for which I won the Emmy, which was Outstanding Writing in a Comedy Series, I was, you know, the first Black woman to be nominated in that category. Obviously, became the first to win, and just recently, Quinta Brunson joined me in that category. So because we know each other and we have a relationship, we were able to text each other, and then there were two. But of course, and I followed up and said, but now we can both hold the door open together. And I think but also too, I mean, there's such a wonderful community of women, and particularly women of color in my industry, and there is still a fight. There's a fight for women, there's a fight for women of color, there's a fight for visibility. I think the fight will continue because of the society in which we live that sort of has to sort of create its own caste system for whatever reason. But I think that I will always be myself. I will always create. I will always stand as an example. And I think that I will always continue to push the industry to pay me for what I'm worth. And I actually remember saying a number that I wanted to have for a commitment of 5 years to a studio. And I got, there was a small difference of that number, what I wanted. But it wasn't just about, let me set this precedent for some sort of political standpoint.
Right.
It really was, it is political in itself for me to be who I am, to demand that amount of money, but to also set a precedent for the industry and also understanding my worth. And I think that is really how it has to work. It must be these individuals' journeys, which is really important. And I hope my journey can be one that is an example, can be a blueprint, so that way others have to follow. Whoopi Goldberg was absolutely a blueprint for myself, and I hope to be a North Star for someone else.
That's awesome. That's great. Jen?
I still remember the first check I made for playing women's pro football. Now, I say pro instead of professional because we can't afford those zeros yet. It was 2004. We had the perfect season, 12-0, won the championship at the end. And at the end, we all got rings and a check for $12. It was literally $1 a game. And I remember, now this was before the days of photo deposit, so keeping a check as a reminder was a choice, right? It was cash it or keep it. And I kept it as a reminder for what I was playing for, right? This is America's game. Why is this the one sport that doesn't have parity at any level, from peewees to the pros? Why is this the place and the space that women cannot go? It's long been referred to as the final frontier for women in sports. And that's what kept me going, right? In a place and a space that had yet to create opportunities for women. It was like, when we do this, right? When we play this game that we're not allowed to play, when we go and do this thing that we're not supposed to do and do it well, can't we not only change the game, change the sport, but can't we shift culture, right? Can't we show that women belong on every field, that we can play any game that we want to, right? Why was this that one place? And so as I look at where we are in the modern landscape, women who play football are still not getting paid. It does not yet exist. But they're starting to become more visible, which means the conversations are starting to happen, which means that the opportunities for making money and telling those stories will happen. And I believe what you said, this is what we need. We need Hollywood to actually tell some of the stories that we don't know yet, right? We don't know about the women who have been grinding in the trenches, playing America's game for a very long time and doing it in the dark. And when we fall in love with them in a scripted content, the reality and the alternative reality or the storytelling reality become closer. But you need those places where this story then drives people to say, oh, who are these real women? And we are right now at a tipping point for girls and women in football, because you can see them now on the sidelines of the biggest stage in sports, which is the National Football League. And we just now had flag football become a varsity sport in NAIA and NJCAA schools, which means for the first time in the history of football, girls can change the trajectory of their lives and their families' lives through education. And so we have the longest way to go, right? We talk about 80-something cents on a dollar, and I'm talking about $1 versus millions.
Yeah.
But that means there's so much room for potential.
Wonderful. I'll stick with sports for a minute and talk about Serena Williams, who recently said she needs to retire because she cannot make her family life and her professional life work. And if Serena Williams doesn't have the resources to make that work, who does? It's obviously a very personal choice. But, you know, I think, Reshma, you obviously very in tune with and focused on what moms, what women who are parents need to succeed. Any notes on things that you think companies are doing well or can build upon to make it more sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Serena's, op-ed in Vogue was really powerful, and I think the reality is it wasn't a choice for her. Most mothers, when they're deciding to, leave the workforce or retire, it never is a choice.
Right.
And so I think the first thing is like, we have to start, I mean, to your point about culture, we have to start telling the truth. The reality is that, 75% of high school valedictorians are girls. The majority of those that get their college degrees are women. The majority of those that get their PhDs and their master's degrees are women. So why, when we look at the top Fortune 100 CEOs or the top, 100 senators in the United States, why aren't they women too? And that has nothing to do with our ability or our performance. It has everything to do with discrimination. And the reality is like, and I think that we've just been lying to women, though, and telling them that the problem is you. I mean, how many of us have been told, like, if you color code your calendar, you too can be CEO. Like, if you just get a mentor or a sponsor, just lean in real hard. And everything that we are fed in terms of books, in terms of what we see in movies, I mean, Lena's trying to change that, but it's like, do a power pose before you walk into a meeting, just get a little more confidence. It's just bullshit, And so, and we're being fed this stuff, and we're feeding this stuff to our girls. And so what I say to companies is throw out your women's empowerment playbook. Stop trying to fix women. We're not the problem. And fix yourself. You're the problem. And the reason why you're the problem, or companies are the problem, is like, many companies still don't have gender-neutral paid leave policies. The reason why women are doing 2/3 of the caregiving work is because we don't give men an opportunity to, right? And so that's like a basic, right? And we shouldn't be having women go back to work, whether you're a salaried worker or an hourly worker, back to work, 10 days after having a baby. The same should be for all women, and women like our mothers, who were working class women who were going back to work 10 days after they had us, or we were latchkey kids or making these kinds of sacrifices. The second thing is that, workplaces should be providing childcare. They should be subsidizing it, period. Childcare is not a personal choice. I was a latchkey kid from the time that I was 7 years old, and we were one of the only brown families that lived in a white working class neighborhood. And I was constantly bullied at school. We would have our house spray painted, go back to your own country. And my mother, because they couldn't afford childcare, didn't have a choice but to give my sister the keys when she was 10 years old and say, walk your sister from school home. I should say, run your sister from school to home. And I think about how my mother felt at 3:45 every single day, thinking about how her babies and whether they made it home safely, and the fact that she had no other choice.
Right.
Millions and millions of mothers make that choice every single day, that unconscionable choice, because we as a nation refuse to make childcare affordable and available. But companies can, in the fact that, and I would say in Congress's disgrace in bailing out airlines instead of bailing out moms, companies can do something about it by starting to pay for childcare.
Yeah. Well said. Building on what you said, about companies need to fix themselves, and there's not something wrong with the women. And I had a very senior leadership one time tell me, Jessica, I want you to fix our women recruiting problem. And I said, well, thank you for the honor, but it will take you and everyone here to fix our women recruiting problem. So I love what you said. So as you also mentioned earlier, women of color, LGBTQ plus women are uniquely and disproportionately discriminated against, kept away from opportunity. Any examples from your work where you think we're really embracing all women and making progress, or things like childcare that really need concerted focus?
I just think, well, in terms of my industry, I think there's still so many stories that need to be told in terms of women who are disabled, women who come from immigrant families, women who are LGBTQIA+. I think it's women who have the trans experience. I think there's just so many more stories that need to be told that aren't being told because they aren't the broad audience's story, per se. And I think that is the difficult part, is that just because it's not focusing on something that mainstream necessarily wants to pay attention to, it can be difficult because these women's stories need to be told, but it's about supply and demand, and it's also about showing support. I mean, a film like The Woman King, who was directed by someone, Gina Prince Bythewood, who is an amazing woman who I used to be her assistant, and I'm still close friends now, and I think that is really, but that was important for people to go support Viola Davis and Lashana and all these women. And also Wakanda Forever is really focusing on the women more this next movie, as people can see in the rollout. And I think that is important for everyone to go see these films and to support them, so that way our industry is about the bottom dollar, is about green. And so they want to know if something makes money, they will continue to do more movies like that. And I think that's really what it boils down to for us. It's about where's the support, where's that energy going, and you'll get more of that.
Yep. I saw both of them.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Did you want to add something?
I saw both of them. They're amazing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it's important. You know, we need that support.
I think one of the things that you see in sports is that talent and the game becomes a place where we can be unified and we get to know each other, right? I am the person that I am because of sports. And I am so thankful for all of the locker rooms that I've been a part of. It's women and men who I've played with, played against, coached with, coached against, domestic and abroad. And we are every make, model, shape, size, creed, color, sexual orientation, religious background, you name it, we've got it. And because we're on the field together, we learn how somebody plays, right? And you see to the core of the person. And then you have this beautiful gift of empathy, where that game gave you an opportunity to see how somebody is. Like, I saw you lay out for a block. I know you're a good human. And now we get to know each other, and I think it stretches the imagination. But what we need to do is also spend the dollars there, right? Because I think we do a great job in women's sports particularly of being inclusive, right? And we've all fought battles together because we're still underdogs. And yet we need to put those eyeballs on them, and we need to realize as women that we have the opportunity to take our purchasing power and make people make decisions. Right? The majority of the disposable income in households lies with women. So ladies, make your dollars make sense. Invest in what you want to do and hold companies accountable with your pocketbook. If you're spending the money and they won't spend money back on women's films or on women's sports, spend it elsewhere. Because guess what? If nothing else gets their attention, the decimal points will.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said.
I think just building on that too, I feel like, listen, we built workplaces for white men that had a stay-at-home partner. I mean, even if you think about the fact that like workplaces, work days are 9 to 5 and school days are 8:30 to 3. That doesn't make sense. Like, why is it so damn cold in offices? Like all these things, right? They were never built for anybody that was black, brown, LGBTQ, trans, binary, non-binary. So I think in many ways, the pandemic has given us an opportunity to do a redo.
Yeah.
But there's so much resistance towards that redo. And I think whenever you're building anything, you should always build for the most vulnerable. When I built Girls Who Code, I went to refugee camps and the poorest communities for girls who had no Wi-Fi and no devices. And I said, if I can teach her, I can teach anybody. And it's the same thing for workplaces. Workplaces should be built for a single mom, a woman of color, a black woman. 70% of black women are the single breadwinner and the single caregiver of their families. And so if we're building workplaces for her, they're going to work for everybody.
Yeah, that's so key. And I mean, COVID was horrible, but caused us to shake the snow globe, right? And reimagine, where do I work? When do I work? Am I willing to work for that pay or that situation? And I really hope we all continue to shake the snow globe and reimagine what work is and how it manifests for people, and particularly, as I think, designing for the most vulnerable or the most neglected is a really great rallying cry. I love that. Dr. Well, let's talk about, so you can't be it if you can't see it. Suddenly you're an NFL coach. Wouldn't say you got a lot of friends to get advice from who are from your background. How did you manage to find mentorship and support in a setting where you were literally unheard of?
I think, well, and when you say that, one of the things I want to say to anybody is, when you're a first, it inherently means only.
Yeah.
Right? People talk about and they glorify the first, like you said, oh, and now there were two. Right? They glorify it, but they don't realize like how tough that really is. And for me, thankfully, I got good advice from Terry Glenn, who was one of my mentors, and he said, whatever you do, be 100% authentic. He said, if you are the same person you were here when I was coaching in Arena, those guys will absolutely love you. But if you're fake in any way, they will sense it and they will eat you alive. And so I held that to myself. And one thing I knew very distinctly, I was never going to outman a man at being a man. And frankly, they didn't need any more men. They had plenty. They needed me. And they needed me to go in as my full self. And one of the secrets to myself, or to my success, was these are players, yes, but they are very real people. And these are young men who we make into superheroes. Literally, they're in pads and helmet. If you were storytelling, you would make them look like football players. In fact, we do see that all the time. And they're very real young men. And so it's not about just the plays that you make, it's the person who does that. So my rule was, I always have a minute. Coach, do you have a minute? Yeah, I do. What's up? Coach, my wife is so mad at me. I don't even know what I did. Great. What did you do? Well, Coach, I said this. Great. So she heard this. But Coach, why would she hear that when I said this? No, sir. I said I had a minute. That takes much longer. Do you want me to tell you how to fix it? Yes. Now let me tell you something about why that minute is so special. Because your life and your wife and your kids and all of those things are way more important than the game of football. But if your mind and your heart are there, you're not playing this game here. So I have to, if I am trusted enough for you to bring me into that world, to what really matters, and I can help you get back to present, guess what? When I tell you to do something on the football field, it's really easy to get a yes. It's really easy. And then the biggest story that came out my entire time in the NFL was I wrote notes and put them in their lockers. And they called me the noteworthy coach. Now at that time, being first and only, that means that the entire narrative surrounding women coaching in men's pro football was, would guys take coaching from a woman? Sure. Spoiler alert, most guys have been coached by women their whole lives. So it might actually be received better to have more than one voice in the room and more than one type of voice in the room. But the notes became national news because one of my linebackers, right, the roughest, toughest guys in football, said it in his entire football career. He'd never had a coach care like that. So it's to the heart of it. No matter what business you're in, it's people. People matter. And if it matters on a football field, it sure matters in all of our lives. And those matters show themselves in whatever industry they're in. Guys used to say they thought I was psychic. No, your game told me everything about you. Your heart and your mind aren't here, so your tackles won't be either.
Amazing. So we only have a couple minutes left. This whole day is about the future of work. So how do you want to imagine the future of work for women and humanity?
I mean, my hope is that it's something that's purpose-led and purpose-driven. Because for me, I really don't think of it as work. I think of it as offerings. I think of it as purpose. And I think of it as my life's work, if anything at all. And I think that's something that I know not everybody has. I know it's a privilege, and I understand that my work actually affects so many.
Yeah.
I do get that. So it's with great responsibility that I try to be mindful of what we're doing, but also never afraid to continue to push us forward into places that can be uncomfortable, but places that are honest and real, and maybe stories we haven't heard before. So ultimately, that's what I want my work to do, is to continue to be honest, to be a reflection of the times, and to be something that people can continue to go back to.
Wonderful. Reshma?
Yeah, I think the pandemic, people want to just live differently.
Yeah.
They want to work differently. It's funny when they talk about that term, quietly quitting. I'm like, these kids aren't quietly quitting. They're joyfully living. Mm-hmm. And so we have to just really process what just happened and how the impact that it's had on work. Mm-hmm. And not keep resisting that.
Mm-hmm. Be comfortable with making it change for us.
People don't want to work that way anymore. I don't want to work. I mean, hustle culture is dead, and we should let it die.
Yeah.
I want to see empathy embraced as a leadership trait, period. This is not a woman thing that we just quietly put into the box. Empathy is leadership. You cannot lead somebody you do not know. You cannot take someone to a place if you don't understand the core of what motivates them, where they want to go, and how they want to see the world, right? If your bonus doesn't match what motivates somebody, you're both going to be frustrated, okay? Business is about communication, okay? Relationships are about communication. And so often we are all prey to misses in communication. This is not miscommunication. Okay? Miscommunication implies that I said something wrong or you heard it wrong. Neither one of us is wrong, but we miss each other often. You're going to miss so many people because you never learned them. Okay? The greatest gift someone can give me is the ability to walk in your shoes. And I love those socks, by the way. Y'all need to see those are fierce, right? Because I couldn't have lived it. But I can experience it through you. And so if we give the gift of understanding, of empathy, of realizing that everything really revolves around people, then we get to a workplace which, allows you to drop off your kids. Come on. Like, certain things are not hard, right? But we have to know each other in order to create for each other.
Wow. Well, you have given us many gifts today. Thank you for your hearts and your minds and your time with us. Thank you. We have a closing, but cannot thank our panelists enough for their wonderful leadership.